Hello and welcome everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story Naruto the Zombie Ninja Part 3. If you enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to the channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
As he walked, Naruto could feel eyes on his back. He and Gaara walked at the very front of the group, as close to each other as possible to keep the demons calm. Fortunately, having Gaara by his side kept the others, particularly Kakashi and Sakura, from confronting him with the questions he knew they all had. Temari and Kankuro were at the back of the pack, ready to strike if any attacks came from behind. "You don't want to go back?" Gaara asked, startling Naruto. "No, why? I'm afraid I won't be able to leave again." Naruto expressed concern. "Won't they let you?" Gaara inquired. "I don't know," Naruto replied, wondering what Sasuke would do if he found out he was back. "And I'll stay and make certain they don't stop you," Gaara explained. Naruto was taken aback by his appearance. "You don't have to do that, Gaara." Gaara did not respond. The gates of Konoha eventually appeared, and the ninjas in the group had never been happier to see their small village. Several Anbu came out to greet them. Having anticipated their arrival, medical nins also arrived and immediately assisted the injured to the hospital. Temari and Kankuro moved to the front of the group, with Temari standing next to Naruto and Kankuro standing next to Gaara. "Ninjas of the Sand." One of the Anbu was surprised to hear. "We had no idea you were coming," he said to one of his masked comrades. "Go find the captain," he instructed. Naruto shut his eyes. He knew there was no avoiding Sasuke, but he didn't want to see him as he stood flanked by the Sand siblings, covered in mostly his own blood, trying to ignore the fox, who desperately wanted to take over now that he had a friend. "That won't be necessary," Shikamaru said as he took a step forward. "They assisted us when we were ambushed, and I requested that they accompany us here in case we were attacked again." When he saw that no one was going to capture Sasuke, Naruto relaxed. Sakura approached them. "Naruto, you should go see Tsunade-sama," she said, noticing blood seeping through the clean bandages she had wrapped around his arm a few hours before. Naruto nodded and began walking towards the village. Everyone watched as Gaara followed, never leaving his side. Kankuro and Temari exchanged glances. They assumed they would leave once they arrived in Konoha. They followed Naruto and their brother, unsure what had changed. Sasuke was aware that someone was following him, but he did not turn around. He was too preoccupied with venting his rage on the tree in front of him. Bits of bark flew as his leg kicked at the tree's rough surface, and his knuckles were bleeding from punching the rough surface. Sasuke realized it wasn't enough. He wanted to splinter the tree and hear it crack as it fell over. He summoned a massive amount of chakra to his palm by gripping his left wrist with his right hand. He charged at the tree, shoving his fist through it and smirking as it leaned precariously before finally collapsing with a loud crash. He didn't feel any better as he stood panting over the broken tree. Finally, the man behind him said something. "I know trees are difficult and tricky opponents, but I'm not sure you needed to use Chidori on it," Kakashi said, peering over the latest edition of Come Come Paradise at the younger man. "What do you want, Kakashi?" Sasuke asked, wiping his brow as he turned to face him. "You didn't greet us when we returned," Kakashi pointed out. "I've been working out." Kakashi became solemn and closed his book, slipping it into his pocket. "What happened the other day during the battle?" he inquired. "Why has Kyuubi appeared?" "I don't know," Sasuke said, preferring not to discuss Naruto. "Does it have anything to do with why Naruto pretended to be dead?" persisted Kakashi. "I don't know," Sasuke said, becoming enraged. He wasn't saying anything about it. He'd spent the last 3 hours training and destroying trees on the training grounds to avoid thinking about Naruto leaving. He didn't need Kakashi to bring him up again. He pushed past his old sensei and started walking home. "Ask Naruto if you want to know," sneered Sasuke, knowing full well that Kakashi couldn't. When Kakashi said the next words, Sasuke almost tripped over himself. "I would. But he's never alone with Tsunade and Gaara." Sasuke spun around so quickly that Kakashi wondered if he'd given himself whiplash. "What?" "Tsunade ushered him into surgery as soon as we got back, and Gaara has been in his room ever since." "Is he here?" Sasuke inquired. "Yeah, it's strange. Naruto seems to trust him, but they almost killed each other when they were 12, Kakashi explained. Sasuke blinked in confusion before realizing what Kakashi was saying. "No, Gaara. Naruto. Is Naruto in Konoha?" It was Kakashi's turn to be perplexed. "Yes, he returned with us earlier." Sasuke didn't even say goodbye before turning and heading for the hospital. When Sasuke arrived at the hospital, he immediately found Naruto's room number. He took his time walking down the white hallway, unsure what he would say when he arrived. He was so deep in thought that he almost didn't hear the voice say his name. "Sasuke Uchiha." Temari and Kankuro were standing across the hall from Naruto's door. The latter having called out to him, Kankuro was leaning against the wall, arms folded, and the white sack-like object he normally carried on his back propped up next to him. Temari was leaning comfortably on her tall metal fan next to her. They were staring at him, and he returned their gaze. "I'm surprised you've come," Temari commented. "Why is that?" Sasuke asked, not really in the mood but amusing himself. "Well, we heard you tried to kill Naruto a few times, so why bother checking on him now?" Sasuke was surprised, but his stoic expression concealed it. How would they be aware of this? Only he and Naruto knew what had occurred in the Valley of the End. Kakashi had told him that Naruto had not told anyone when he was returned to Konoha, and Sasuke had certainly not mentioned it. Kakashi had mentioned Naruto's trust in Gaara. Had Naruto informed them? "How is that any of your concern?" Sasuke inquired. "Naruto is very important to us," Kankuro explained. "We were there for him during some of his darkest times." Sasuke's expression showed some surprise. When had this occurred? What were some of Naruto's low points? He knew more about Naruto than anyone else in Konoha, but he felt he knew nothing about the other man. But these strangers knew everything. Naruto had approached them for assistance. "However, if you try to hurt him again, you won't have to deal with us," Temari stated. "However, Gaara will not be forgiving, if I recall," Sasuke said, clenching his fists. "Gaara, you attempted to kill Naruto himself." His anger was rising, angry at them for suggesting he'd hurt Naruto again. Anger directed at Gaara for even attempting to protect Naruto. Anger at Naruto for choosing the Sand siblings over him. Most of all, he was angry at himself for being the source of the problem. He had betrayed Naruto and attempted to murder him. After that, how could he expect the other men to trust him? Yes, Kankuro concurred. But Gaara, wasn't he his friend at the time? Sasuke was at a loss for words in response. He turned and knocked on Naruto's door, listening for a muffled come-in before entering. Naruto sat up in his hospital bed, a pillow behind his back and his bandana-wrapped head against the wall, when Sasuke entered and gently closed the door. His eyes opened, brilliant blue orbs staring at him. "Sasuke," Naruto said, a small smile on his face. "Naruto." Sasuke moved forward, but came to a halt when he noticed Gaara sitting on the other side of Naruto's bed, staring at him. When Sasuke noticed Gaara's hand lightly resting on Naruto's uninjured arm, he raised an eyebrow. Of course, Sasuke had no idea that the hand was there to calm the beasts within the two men. The demons reveled in each other's abilities, and direct contact prevented them from attempting to take over. Both blue-eyed men were staring at him, but Gaara's eyes were cold in a way that Naruto's had never been. Sasuke finally regained his voice. "Are you okay?" he asked, ignoring Gaara, who hadn't moved his gaze from him. "Yeah," Naruto agreed. "This time, Tsunade Baba used chakra to heal the bone after surgery. So if I get into another battle, hopefully the worst that can happen is I tear open the stitches." "How long will you be here?" "Until Tsunade says I can leave," Naruto said, not looking him in the eyes. Sasuke had a lot to say, and he wanted to say it all in private, looking at Gaara, who was still staring at him. Sasuke realized the redhead had no intention of leaving. Sasuke stood there for a long time, staring at Naruto, who returned his gaze. Gaara was staring as well, because he didn't seem to need to blink. Finally, Naruto broke to silence. "Gaara, could you please give us a minute?" he asked. Only then did Gaara's gaze shift from Sasuke to Naruto, and after a brief moment of observation, he silently stood, walking to the door and exiting. Naruto flushed slightly as Kyuubi struggled. "He'll be right back, bastard fox," he said quietly, hoping to calm the demon down, instead of attempting to take over. Kyuubi listened and began pacing restlessly. It was pointless to fight when Naruto was awake, for the time being. At least, Kyuubi had a chance once the seal was broken. Sasuke approached Naruto's bedside. "I didn't realize you and Gaara were so close," he finally said, his voice a little harsh. "Yeah, well, we have a lot in common," Naruto shrugged. "Don't make comparisons to him," Sasuke said. "He has a bloodlust that you will never have. Don't judge him." "Sasuke," Naruto said solemnly, "he's been betrayed too many times in his life not to be bitter. But he's also not the same person we met as kids. And I have the same bloodlust as he does. I almost killed you 2 days ago. Or did you forget? It wasn't your fault," Sasuke said, shaking his head. "It's not my fault, but it's my responsibility. I'm endangering everyone here. You are the reason we even survived that battle. If you hadn't used Kage Bunshin, we would have died," Sasuke said, moving over and sitting on Naruto's bedside. "Great," I save everyone, then celebrate by eating them all. Naruto chuckled. You didn't eat anyone. And you regained control. No. That's the whole point, Sasuke. I've never had control. I didn't have control over having this parasite put in me. I didn't have control over the villagers hating me for it. I didn't have control over you betraying us all. I didn't have control over having to leave Konoha. And I don't have control over Kyuubi. Sasuke was at a loss for words. Noting that Naruto had mentioned his betrayal. I'm losing control. Sasuke, Naruto admitted, I'm not going to let you get involved in this. It's too late. I'm already involved, said Sasuke. I've been involved since we started working together. I don't get it. You used to despise me when we were teammates. What's changed? Nothing has changed. I've never disliked you. Sasuke stated, your attitude just irritated me. No one in the village liked you. You were the dope in our class. You lived alone, and yet you were the happiest person I had ever seen. I didn't know what to make of it. You had so many reasons to be sad. But you never were. Sure I was. But showing it would be showing weakness. We all had something to hide behind. Sasuke, my obnoxious personality, your mysterious silent act, Sakura's crush on you, and Kakashi's books. Naruto paused, then continued. Besides, you miss out on life if you dwell on the sad things, he pointed out to Sasuke, who realized he was talking about himself. Tsunade entered after hearing a knock on the door and pausing when she noticed Naruto and Sasuke staring at each other. I'm sorry, Sasuke. She apologized. I need to check on Naruto. So you'll have to leave. Sasuke was unsure whether he felt better or worse when he left Naruto's room. And Naruto had made no promises to stay in Konoha. He passed by all three Saiyan siblings, who followed him silently with their eyes until he was out of sight. The following afternoon, Sasuke and Shikamaru were summoned to Tsunade's office to give her an in-depth account of their mission. Tsunade frowned as she asked, Naruto lost control of Kyuubi? Shikamaru gave a nod. Yes, I'm not sure why it happened at that specific time. He fell asleep, Sasuke said. He didn't want them to think Naruto lost control at random. They both turned to face him. He was standing in the corner of her office, arms crossed across his chest. His fox mask was dangling from his hip. He was knocked out by the snake venom. Tsunade appeared to be thinking, well, then, why doesn't Kyuubi try to take over whenever Naruto sleeps? It does, Sasuke said, his face solemn. Naruto hasn't slept properly since he was a teenager. There was a stunned silence as Tsunade and Shikamaru processed his words. Tsunade was about to say, come in, when the office door opened and Kakashi walked in. Tsunade sighed when he saw him. Kakashi, I told you I couldn't answer your questions because there are some that not even I know the answer to. Sasuke smirked a little. Please forgive me, Tsunade-sama, but that is not when I'm here, Kakashi explained. Naruto and Gaara are getting ready to fight. Tsunade and Sasuke both asked, what? I thought you should know. Because their last fight destroyed a quarter of the forest, Kakashi explained. Yes, Kakashi, she replied, rising and striding quickly to the door. Shikamaru and Sasuke were right behind her. Gaara's monotone voice inquired, rules? In an otherwise empty training field, he stood about 10 feet away from Naruto. Temari and Kankuro were off to the side, leaving plenty of room to get out of the way of the younger men. They'd learned over the years that Naruto and Gaara's spars often covered a lot of ground. Naruto appeared thoughtful as he tightened the hidaite around his hair. Though killing each other, Gaara made a conscious effort to roll his eyes. I think that's a foregone conclusion, he said. Well, with you, you never know, Naruto chuckled. I like to establish the no-death rule right away. Kankuro smiled as Temari stifled a laugh. Naruto was the only person who could insult Gaara without learning Gaara's desert graveyard technique. He was also the only person Gaara considered worthy of sparring with. Gaara's gourd suddenly became lidless, and sand began to pour from it as gently as sand in an hourglass. Naruto waited for Gaara to make a move as the sand came to a halt. The redhead, on the other hand, was perfectly content to wait. Naruto sighed after a few moments. Gaara was well aware that patience had never been one of his strong suits. To hell with it, Naruto muttered, raising his hands and performing familiar seals. He laughed. Kyuubi had healed his arm to the point where he only felt minor discomfort. Nothing compared to the sharp pains of before. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, says one. There was a cloud of smoke, and 5 Narutos had appeared in front of Gaara. Gaara knew Naruto had a plan, or else he would have summoned a slew of clones and charged at him. Though they had sparred enough that Naruto knew that approach never worked. Naruto fingered the kunai and shuriken in his waist pouches. They were usually used to distract or catch an opponent off guard. But what was the point when Sand moved to protect Gaara without the other man even realizing it? His brows rose as his finger brushed across a scroll. Sakura and Lee were on their way to train when they noticed 5 Narutos and Gaara fighting. They were concerned that it was a fight until they noticed Temari and Kankuro calmly watching from the sidelines. Are they sparring? Sakura inquired as they approached the 2 siblings. Yeah, Temari agreed, watching Naruto and wondering what kind of strategy he was hatching. Oh, exclaimed Lee with delight. Do you think they'll mind if we watch? Temari shook her head. She and Kankuro both heard a few more people approaching them quickly, but neither of them turned to see who it was. Averting your gaze during one of these spars could result in you missing a crucial move. Naruto and Gaara's fights were more akin to chess matches than sparring, of course. Naruto had to do the majority of the thinking, and it was always fascinating to see what he came up with to try to get past Gaara's defense, if he could come up with a good enough distraction. His speed was sometimes enough. They also had to pay close attention because just watching them could be dangerous because both men tended to use their more dangerous and lethal moves on each other. What's going on here? The Hokage demanded as she drew even with them. Naruto and Gaara are sparring, Lee exclaimed, his own training plans completely forgotten. Kankuro caught sight of the Hokage and noticed the shadow user, the silver-haired copy ninja, and the Uchiha with her. I don't think this is a good idea, Tsunade said, stepping forward to stop things from getting out of hand. No, Hokage-sama, Temari replied. Naruto is about to make a move, and once Gaara gets started, well, let them finish. Don't be concerned, Kankuro said. They've already made the no-killing rule. 6 pairs of stunned eyes turned to the siblings, who were staring intently at the younger men. Sasuke started forward, not wanting to see Naruto get hurt again, but one of the Narutos suddenly pulled a scroll from the pouch around his waist. He bit his thumb and opened the scroll, smearing blood along its length before closing it again. With the scroll still in his hands, he began a series of seals, which Kakashi recognized. Summoning no jutsu, exclaimed Naruto, slamming the scroll to the ground. A massive cloud of smoke obscured all visibility. When the smoke cleared, everyone in the room looked at the whiskered man, who was standing with his hands on his hips, looking distinctly proud of himself. They were expecting something spectacular, such as a large frog or even Gamabunta. They weren't expecting to see hundreds of frogs the size of Gamakichi hopping around the clearing, asking each other if there were snacks. He's still a moron, Sakura exclaimed. Lee laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his neck. Gaara, on the other hand, was still staring at him, treating him as no less of a threat. I hope they can run, Naruto, he said before making his move. Sand poured from the gird earlier rose into the air, splitting into small balls that Gaara's chakra hardened. Sandballs began to rain down on the small frogs like hail. Of course they can run, they're cowards, Naruto said as the frogs began shrieking in high-pitched voices and hopping all over the training field, avoiding the sand. Hit frogs would yell, oh, before disappearing with a pop. Overall, the battle had devolved into chaos, which seemed entirely appropriate when dealing with Naruto. Where are you? Gaara inquired, calmly watching as more frogs vanished. The same thing had occurred to Sasuke, Kakashi, Shikamaru, and the Sand siblings. Sakura and Lee were perplexed by the question, but Tsunade recognized it and wondered how she had missed it before. There had been 4 clones of Naruto before he summoned the frogs, but now he stood alone among the hundreds of frogs. One of the frogs to Gaara's right transformed into Naruto, who exclaimed, right here, before tossing 2 kunai at him. One flew at Gaara and was stopped by his sand, while the other flew off course and landed uselessly behind the Sand ninja. Sand flew into the attacking Naruto with a flick of Gaara's wrist, and he vanished on impact. 1, Gaara replied. Cage Bunshin and Henge, Lee exclaimed in awe. The frogs were still squealing as they hopped around in the midst of the sand hail. There was a pop, and another frog transformed into Naruto, who threw 2 kunai at Gaara's left side. These 2 made contact with the sand shield but had no effect on Gaara, who threw sand at Naruto, turning him into nothing more than a cloud of smoke. 2, Gaara replied, with a loud cry. Another Naruto appeared in the form of a frog, tossing several shuriken at Gaara only to see them harmlessly bounce off the sand. That clone was also quickly dispatched with a sand fist. 3, Shikamaru raised his head. He's faced Gaara before, he told Sasuke. He knows weapons will not pass through Gaara's sand, so he's wasting his time. Sasuke remained silent while Kakashi nodded. They expected Gaara to wait for the 4th clone to emerge, so they were taken aback when he suddenly stretched out his arm, except for Tsunade. Everyone understood what this motion meant and watched with wide eyes as Naruto, who had been standing calmly across the clearing, saw the sand fly towards him. He tried to flee, but unseen sand on the ground grabbed his ankles and held him still. The sand hand encircled the struggling Naruto until they couldn't see him anymore. They waited to see if Naruto would break free. But after a few moments of silence, they assumed Gaara had won the spar when Gaara closed his fist, causing the sand to crush Naruto. Tsunade gasped, Sakura stifled a scream, and the others froze in shock. Only Temari and Kankuro appeared unaffected. Shikamaru was the first to notice that the blood that usually accompanied Gaara's desert graveyard was missing. There was a pop, and smoke slid out from between the sands gently. Gaara said, lowering his arm and returning his gaze to the remaining frogs. When Gaara closed his fist, Sasuke was certain his heart had stopped. Looking around at the pale faces, he realized he wasn't the only one. Kakashi wondered what Naruto's plan was. He knew the real him was among the frogs, but he had no idea what good that would do him. Shikamaru's frown indicated that even the young genius hadn't figured it out yet. Gaara began shooting sand at the remaining frogs. Rasengan, yelled someone from behind him. Kankuro inquired, where did he come from? The kunai, Kakashi said, having just realized what he was talking about. The clone's first kunai, which missed Gaara and landed behind him. He turned himself into a kunai. Lee inquired, Kakashi. Sasuke and Sakura shared a knowing look. It wasn't the first time Naruto had used this method. Gaara had been completely caught off guard. There had been no frogs in his path. Where had Naruto appeared? He only had enough time to crouch and place his hands on the ground, causing a thick wall of sand to fly into the air and block his path to Naruto. Gaara, on the other hand, was not at ease. He backed away from the wall and sealed several times. Naruto smashed through the sand wall, sinking the Rasengan into a large pile of sand in the shape of a fat raccoon wearing a hat. Lee exhaled. The ultimate shield? What? Asked Sakura and Shikamaru. That's Gaara's ultimate defense, Lee said, recalling the odd-looking thing from the fight with Kimimaro so many years ago. What is that jutsu that made Gaara have to call on that? Lee wondered as he watched Naruto pull his hand out of the sand. Tsunade replied, that is the Rasengan. Only Naruto, Jiraiya, and the fourth Hokage have ever mastered it. They stared at her, then back at the young man who had just used such a powerful jutsu. He was complaining to Gaara. Using your giant raccoon isn't fair. He grumbled. You use Rasengan, and I use the shield of Sukaku, Gaara said flatly. He reached out his arm, and sand flew at Naruto, who was quickly surrounded. He struggled at first, but he was soon cocooned. Give up? Asked Gaara. Like hell, Naruto yelled from inside the desert coffin. Sasuke made a move to stop Gaara when he closed his hand slightly. He would not stand by and watch Naruto be crushed to death. Calm down, Uchiha, Kankuro advised. Gaara will not harm him. Besides, Temari explained, Gaara couldn't crush him anyway with Naruto's chakra control. What exactly do you mean? Sakura inquired. Naruto can make his chakra surround and harden around him, like an invisible shell, Temari explained. It's similar to Gaara's sand armor, except Gaara's does it automatically. Naruto has to think about it. Kankuro gave a nod. So if he's distracted, he can still be hurt. But the sand won't be able to crush him in this case. Gaara is just increasing the pressure to make him uncomfortable. Konoha's ninjas stared at the sand that held Naruto. Was it even possible to have such chakra control? Tsunade had never heard of anything like it. Sasuke suddenly remembered the night he and Naruto fought in the Hokage Tower's hallway. A chakra shield. That explains why Naruto was unaffected by Chidori. Gaara's grip tightened even more. Are you finished yet, Naruto? He inquired. Naruto didn't respond, but Gaara could hear seals whispering. He cocked his brow. Maybe the match wasn't as over as he thought. Katen, Ryuka no Jutsu, yelled someone from deep within the sand. Several onlookers looked at Sasuke, who was wide-eyed. That technique was uncommon. In fact, most fire techniques were reserved for the Uchiha clan. Those who had seen Sasuke perform the jutsu on the rare occasion knew that a lot of flames must be coming from Naruto's mouth. But what would happen to Naruto if he had nowhere to go as the fire remained contained in the sand? He's a fire fox, he says. Fire summons him. Sasuke fixed his gaze on the sand ball. What was Naruto up to? The sand appeared unchanged from the outside, but Temari and Kankuro could tell something was going on inside by the way Gaara's hand began to shake, even from a distance. The sand began to glow red, and they could feel the intense heat it was emitting. Glass, Shikamaru exclaimed abruptly. Everyone looked at him, perplexed. When you heat sand to a very high temperature, it turns into glass. When they returned their gaze to the sand, they noticed that it was gradually becoming transparent. Naruto stood in the center, unharmed, as flames flew around his body. The sand began to dissolve around him, forming a pool of liquid glass on the ground. Naruto leaped to the ground, avoiding the glass and putting an end to the fire jutsu, grinning at Gaara with red eyes that quickly faded to blue. Naruto then charged at Gaara, While everyone else waited for the sand to leap up and block him, everyone was surprised when Naruto tackled Gaara, who would have landed painfully on his back if his sand shield hadn't caught him before the impact and gently laid him down. Naruto sitting smugly on his stomach. How come the sand didn't block Naruto? Kakashi wondered. It can detect malicious intent, Temari explained. Otherwise, no one could ever touch him. What did you think of that, Gaara? It took me forever to think of a way to defeat your damn desert coffin. She and Kankuro smiled as Naruto continued to sit on their brother. Gaara raised his brows, pretending to be indifferent, but a tiny smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as the 25-year-old on top of him pretended to be 12, with a mixture of rage and jealousy. Sasuke observed the scene. This was the first time he had seen anything resembling Naruto's previous personality. Naruto was always quiet and almost depressed around him. But with Gaara he seemed happy. Tsunade, Kakashi, and Shikamaru were discussing the spar with Temari and Kankuro, while Sakura and Lee were having their own conversation. Only Sasuke was paying attention to the two remaining on the field. Naruto leaned back, resting his back against Gaara's thighs as Gaara raised his knees. Naruto was still explaining how he came up with the glass idea, brightly smiling as he remembered a specific detail. Sasuke noticed that they appeared to be at ease. He and Naruto were more at ease than they had ever been in their lives. He abruptly turned and walked away. Naruto would never act that way around him. Sasuke had betrayed him, and he would never be able to completely atone for it. As Naruto made his way to Sasuke's house, the sun was slowly setting. He remained on the rooftops so as not to frighten the villagers. Rumors of his return had been circulating since the group of shinobi had returned to Konoha, but he wasn't going to confirm them. Kyuubi was furious with him, and he was certain that if the fox made a physical impact on Naruto, his stomach would be ripped in half from the inside. Gaara was a long way away now. Tsunade had reserved rooms for him and his siblings at Konoha's only inn. Kyuubi desired to be near Sukaku's power, and Naruto had no intention of allowing the two demons to spend any more time together than was absolutely necessary. He quickly found himself in front of Sasuke's door and decided to knock even though Sasuke's living room window was open. For a few moments, Naruto stood on the doorstep, listening for any sound that might indicate that Sasuke was even home. He knocked again, this time louder. Footsteps from inside the house could be heard, and Naruto waited patiently as they became louder. The door was yanked open, and Sasuke locked his gaze on him for several moments. He appeared surprised, but hid it behind his usual cold indifference. Naruto finally asked, "Can I come in?" Sasuke didn't respond, but he did open the door wider and step back, allowing Naruto to enter. "What exactly are you doing here?" he inquired. There are no lights on, and Sasuke's living room was only illuminated by the deep red of the setting sun through the open window. Sasuke shut the door and waited for Naruto to say something. Naruto was taken aback by his appearance. "Well, I was discharged from the hospital, and I just assumed," he cut his sentence short. "Sorry, that was stupid of me," he apologized, smiling. "I'll go get Tsunade Baba to get me a room with Gaara and them," Naruto said, already debating whether seeing Sasuke again was a good idea. He was obviously correct in his assessment. Naruto was struck by a flash of memory. He shook his head, puzzled as to why he was suddenly thinking about practicing chakra control by climbing trees. It was completely arbitrary. It took Sasuke a moment to realize Naruto had arrived looking for a place to stay. "No, you are welcome to stay," he said quickly. "I just assumed you'd leave. I'll be leaving tomorrow with the Sand siblings," Naruto said, almost sad. That information enraged Sasuke for some reason. They were allowed to accompany Naruto, but he was not, nonetheless. Naruto seemed at ease with Gaara. Naruto should spend time with Gaara if he made him happy. Naruto desperately needed some happiness in his life. Sasuke entered the room further, taking a seat on his couch and staring at the floor. "Are you all right?" Naruto inquired, looking down at him with concern, ignoring the flashback of defacing Hokage Mountain when he was 12. What was causing his mind to wander? "You seemed really happy today," Sasuke observed. Naruto frowned at the strange remark. "I was," he admitted. "Is that something that bothers you?" "Of course not," Sasuke replied, quickly looking up. Naruto looked down at him with interest. Sasuke went on, "It just makes me think I can't put you at ease. And I guess you don't trust me anymore." "What?" Naruto inquired, perplexed. He closed his eyes for a moment, bracing himself against a wave of vertigo. "You seem to be able to relax around Gaara, whereas with me you're always on guard." "Sasuke," Naruto said, laughing, "Of course. I'm more relaxed around Gaara because if I lose control of Kyuubi around him, he'll be able to fend me off. Whereas with you, I'm concerned about what might happen. One slip and you'll be dead. Sasuke examined his features, so this wasn't about his treachery. This had nothing to do with Naruto's confidence in him. Naruto was simply concerned. Let me accompany you. Don't leave me here alone, Naruto. Naruto averted his gaze for a moment before returning it to Sasuke. The fox will get you. Sasuke, he predicted, I couldn't possibly forgive myself. I'd rather die with you than stay here alone. Sasuke stated, I despise it here. Everyone in this village regards me as nothing more than the last Uchiha. I'm surrounded by people. But I've never felt more alone. I only stayed here for you, because you love this village and your dream was to be able to protect it. So I stayed here to do it for you. Naruto wanted to respond, but the dizziness from before returned, and he found himself on his knees, using the edge of the couch to support his upper body as memories began to surface in his head unbidden. He clenched his fists, attempting to block out the images from his past, but they persisted in his mind. Naruto, Sasuke inquired, concerned, as his friend fell to his knees. He put a hand on the other man's arm and felt the skin under his hand warm up. Naruto did not respond, and his eyes were tightly shut. Tendrils of red chakra began to weave around Naruto's body, and Sasuke began shaking him by the shoulders. Ignoring his skin's feverish temperature, Naruto, the red chakra flared up, and Sasuke hissed as Naruto's skin became too hot to touch. Burning him, Naruto, exclaimed Sasuke, refusing to touch him again. What exactly is going on? Naruto's eyes opened, and Sasuke felt almost relieved. The blood-red eyes then locked on him. Sasuke stepped back from the couch as Kyuubi stood up slowly, sharp fangs gleaming at him as he grinned. You should have listened to the brat, he said as he approached Sasuke. He said I was going to kill you. He charged at Sasuke, clawed hand outstretched to slash at him. Sasuke dove out of the way, barely missing the razor-sharp nails, wishing he had some kind of weapon to defend himself with. Instead, Kyuubi's clawed hand slashed straight through Sasuke's living room wall. He lunged again at Sasuke, who managed to dodge once more. Red chakra swelled even more around Naruto's body, giving him the appearance of being surrounded by flames. Sasuke's eyes widened as he looked around the living room, and Naruto's fingers began to form seals. There was only one way Kyuubi could avoid that jutsu. Katen, Ryuka no Jutsu, was heard seconds after Sasuke jumped out his thankfully open window, rolling as he landed in his backyard. He turned to face his house, which he saw, with sadness, was now engulfed in flames. Kyuubi followed him outside, slowly walking through the fire that had already eaten away at Sasuke's living room's walls. Naruto, yelled Sasuke, summoning the Sharingan. Wake up, not this time, Uchiha, Kyuubi said as he approached him. Then, in an instant that even the Sharingan couldn't keep up with, Kyuubi appeared in front of him, claws raised. Sasuke tried to dodge, but the claws still caught him, leaving 4 deep gashes on his left shoulder. He staggered away, his right hand attempting to cover his viciously bleeding shoulder. Sasuke's adrenaline was pumping, so he saw the wound more than he felt it. However, when he tried to move his left arm, sharp searing pain caused his vision to swim, and he fought to keep from blacking out. Seals, as well as Chidori, were impossible without the use of his left arm. He was helpless, and Kyuubi lunged at him once more, ready to finish him off. Sasuke blinked as he noticed the sudden sand wall in front of him. He heard Kyuubi's claws harmlessly bounce off it. Looking to his right, he noticed Gaara standing motionless at the edge of his yard. The light from Sasuke's blazing house cast menacing shadows across the red-haired man's face. He heard Kyuubi say, Sakaku, as Kyuubi moved over to Gaara. The sand wall vanished, leaving Sasuke behind. Are you okay? Uchiha, Kankuro inquired. Leaping from a nearby tree, Temari leapt from another tree, standing next to her brother with her fan ready. As he examined Sasuke's heavily bleeding wounds, Sasuke became dizzy and was surprised to feel Kankuro catch him when his knees buckled, allowing him to sit on the ground. Kankuro ripped some of his own shirt and pressed it against Sasuke's shoulder to stop the bleeding. Gaara kept a wary eye on Kyuubi as he approached him. Shikaku could feel Kyuubi's power and was going insane within Gaara, but the Sand Nin ignored the demon as best he could. Kyuubi was reaching out to grab him before he could react. Gaara's devoted sand flew up and blocked Kyuubi's path. Kyuubi used his true speed with a snarl, his hand flying through the sand defense and latching around Gaara's throat. He lifted the sand user a few feet off the ground, but Gaara remained as impassive as ever because of his sand armor. He couldn't feel the hand tightening around his neck. Sakaku, Kyuubi grumbled as Naruto's face moved inches away from Gaara's. I caught my breath. What? Gaara asked, Unsure if Kyuubi realized he was speaking to Sukaku's carrier rather than Sukaku himself. He's stuck in his memories. Kyuubi explained, and the demon smiled. You should try. Imagine the havoc we could cause. Gaara discreetly extended an arm. I don't think either of you is particularly powerful. Gaara said, You're both trapped in two humans and are unable to escape, Gaara explained. But he needed to buy some time for his siblings to do what he needed them to do. When one of Gaara's Sand clones appeared next to them, the Sand siblings and Sasuke looked up in surprise. He's got Naruto trapped in his memories. The clone explained, I can't get him to wake up. What should we do? Temari inquired. That blonde girl. The clone pointed out, the one who can enter minds. Get her as soon as possible. Kankuro inquired. Uchiha, where does she live? Sasuke looked at him. His eyes slightly hazy. His vision was blurring, and he couldn't make out what Kankuro was saying. Uchiha. Sasuke felt like the voice was underwater and he closed his eyes as everything went black. Sasuke, Kankuro said, shaking him carefully, avoiding his injury. Temari. I think he's going into shock from the blood loss. We need a medical nin, she said, kneeling down and helping Kankuro lay the Uchiha flat. Stay here, Kankuro said. I'll find help. Kakashi had never been one for sleep. Sure, he got enough to remain alert and aware, but he certainly didn't sleep the way Naruto had when he was his student. Nor did he find himself nodding off like Tsunade occasionally did in her office. Late into the night or early in the morning he could usually be found at the small black monument near the training grounds, usually sitting calmly and tracing all the names with his eyes before meditating. He sometimes lost track of the hours spent there, which was the reason he was so often late to, well, everything. Tonight his eyes were on one name. Normally he divided his attention between four of them. Rin and Abido were never far from his mind, and of course there was his sensei, the great fourth Hokage, the man who gave his life to protect Konoha from Kyuubi. But tonight he couldn't help but pay more attention to the name that shouldn't be there. Uzumaki Naruto. Kakashi still had no answers to explain Naruto's reasons for pretending to be dead. It seemed as though it had something to do with Kyuubi, but no one was willing to enlighten him. Kakashi's head snapped up when he felt the distinct surge of Kyuubi's malicious chakra. Standing, he quickly headed towards the source, somehow not surprised that he was running in the direction of Sasuke's house. He skidded to a stop when he saw Kankuro moving quickly from the direction Kakashi was headed. Kankuro, what's going on? He asked the puppet master, taking in his torn shirt and flustered appearance. I need a medical nin and that girl who can go into mines, Kankuro told him. What's happened? The longer we stand here talking about it, the less time Uchiha has, Kankuro said. Realizing this was more serious than he had anticipated, Kakashi wasted no more time. Ino lives a few streets from here and Sakura is her neighbor. Come on, he said, leading the way. The two girls were more than confused when Kakashi and Kankuro dragged them from their doorsteps without explanation. As they ran back to the Uchiha estate, Kankuro filled them in, and worry for both Naruto and Sasuke overtook them. Naruto has Kyuubi in him, Ino asked in amazement. I can't believe I didn't figure it out before, Sakura said. That must have been what you saw in his mind, Ino. They were still a slight ways away from Sasuke's house when the flaming building entered their vision. Temari breathed a sigh of relief when she saw her father accompanied by 3 Konoha ninjas. She had been unable to stop Sasuke's bleeding, and she feared that the man would bleed to death if he didn't get proper medical help soon. Sakura rushed to the injured man's side immediately. Judging the damage, she placed her hands on the deep gashes and set to work trying to heal him. Ino and Kakashi were looking wide-eyed at the scene in the yard. Naruto was glowing with red chakra, making him look as if he were lit aflame. They watched as he tossed Gaara across the yard like a rag doll. Gaara's sand suddenly appeared, catching him right before he slammed into a tree and set him back to his feet. Ino jumped when a voice behind her spoke. You need to guide Naruto out of his memories. She turned to see a calm Gaara standing behind her, quite similar to the one currently facing Kyuubi. Ino really didn't want to go back into Naruto's head. The last time was an experience she didn't particularly want to repeat. Gaara's clone spoke. Stick to Naruto's memories and you won't meet with Kyuubi. Ino nodded and swallowed, then raised her hands and performed the seals. It was dark in Naruto's mind, just as it had been the first time. Naruto's memories streamed by her, blurring together into streams of color. How was she supposed to find him? This could take forever. With a deep breath, she stepped into the stream of memories, which immediately stopped moving and focused into a scene. Ino recognized her surroundings instantly. She was near the Ninja Academy, although not too close. There was a crowd of parents and children and happy chatter filled the air. Suddenly catching sight of her 12-year-old self excitedly showing of her new hit I ate to her father, Ino realized exactly what day this was. Graduation day. She looked around the memory for Naruto and paused when she turned and finally spotted him. It was the 12-year-old Naruto. Not the adult one she was looking for. He was sitting by himself on a swing in the playground across from the school, quietly watching the crowd. There were goggles on his forehead, and for a moment Ino wondered why. But then she remembered that Naruto had not graduated. A conversation caught her attention, and from the look on the young Naruto's face she could tell he could hear it too. That's the kid. He's the only one who failed. Well, that's good. We can't have him becoming a shinobi since he is. Hey, we can't talk about that. Ino watched sadly as Naruto slid from the swing and ran off. Suddenly the scene changed and she found herself in the center of the village. She watched a little Naruto stumble from Konoha's sweet shop, backing away quickly. Naruto was younger in this memory than in the last. Maybe 8 or 9 this time. Don't come back here, you little monster, the old woman who owned the shop said, brandishing a broom. Ino looked on in amazement. The little old lady had always seemed so kind when she and Sakura used to visit the shop when they were younger. I won't have you stealing from me. Well, that made sense, Ino thought, watching as she tried to smack Naruto in the head with the broom. He nimbly avoided it, taking off. As he ran by Ino, though, she noticed the money clenched tightly in his fist. The scene blurred again and Ino was surprised to see an older Naruto. This memory was obviously some time after he had left Konoha. His blonde hair was tied up under his hidaite and he was now in darker colors instead of the trademark orange jumpsuit. Ino figured he was probably 16 or 17. It was night and, with a bit of surprise, she saw that he was sitting next to Gaara. They were near the edge of a river and Ino didn't recognize the surroundings at all, so she assumed they weren't anywhere near Konoha. The 2 lumps in sleeping bags not far from the boys must have been Gaara's siblings, she realized. How have you done this for so long? She heard Naruto ask, punctuating his question with a loud yawn. Gaara shrugged. Naruto's eyes began to droop and suddenly a small ball of sand flew up from the ground, smacking him in the head. Oh, Naruto hissed, rubbing the spot he'd been hit. Stay awake, was all Gaara said. It would be easier if you were better company, Naruto growled. Talking to you is about as interesting as talking to a wall. He crossed his arms and looked away from the sand nin with a humph. Do you ever think about just letting go? Gaara suddenly asked. Naruto turned back to him, obviously confused. What? The demon? Do you ever wonder how much easier things would be if you just went to sleep and let him take over? No, Naruto said. It might be easier for us, but think of all the death and destruction we would cause. Gaara looked at him with a raised eyebrow and Ino realized that the red-haired man had never really seemed to care about innocent lives. Okay, fine, Naruto said, catching the meaning behind Gaara's look. How about this then? Letting him take over is proving that you don't have the power to fight him. To let him take over is to show you're weak. There was a pause where Gaara considered his words. I'm not weak, Gaara finally said. Neither am I, Naruto said. The area blurred again and the scene shifted several times, so quickly that Ino could only hear what was being said. Naruto, you're annoying. Baka, stupid. You are such an idiot. What a moron. Ino recognized several of the voices, one of which had been her own. The last voice, though, she definitely recognized. Dope. The scene finally cleared and Ino could once again see her surroundings. She stood on a cliff overlooking a large river that turned into a high waterfall. Looking across the river, she saw a huge statue that stood over the waterfall like a guard. Then she noticed that there was one on the side she was on as well. Ino had never seen this place before and she wondered if it was somewhere that Naruto had come across after leaving Konoha, until she finally saw Naruto standing on the index finger of the statue on her side of the river. He was still clad in the bright orange from his youth, blonde hair hanging heavily around his face. He was soaked. Did that wake you up? He yelled. Ino couldn't see who he was talking to, but he was staring at the face of the statue as if someone was clinging there. A voice she recognized answered him and slowly Ino began to realize what she must be seeing. The infamous fight between Sasuke and Naruto at the Valley of the End. The fight that everyone speculated over but no one knew the details to. Neither Naruto nor Sasuke had ever spoken of it. Sasuke suddenly appeared in her line of vision as he lunged at Naruto, punching him fiercely and knocking him from the statue down to the water below. They exchanged words that Ino couldn't hear and then they went at it, Naruto rushing the statue, while Sasuke ran vertically down. They met with punches and after a moment Naruto ended up back on the water, using his chakra to stand on it, and Sasuke hung from the statue. Ino's eyes widened when Sasuke's left hand began to glow blue with chakra. He was going to use Chidori on Naruto. Sasuke was actually trying to kill Naruto, she realized in shock. Naruto had never told them what had happened when he went after Sasuke, but she never would have believed that Sasuke had actually attempted to kill him. You know, of all my memories, I always seem to come back to this one as my worst, a deep voice said, causing Ino to jump in surprise. She turned quickly to her right to see Naruto. The real Naruto, sitting on the edge of the cliff watching as his younger self powered up racing. The two powerful jutsus met and the adults watched as the boys were tossed backwards from one another. They quickly began to fight again and Sasuke managed to grab a hold of Naruto's collar, picking him up and holding him a few inches from the ground. Ino looked on in horror as Chidori formed once again in Sasuke's hand and was shoved through Naruto's chest. Why didn't you ever tell us? She said softly. Naruto shrugged. I didn't want it hanging over Sasuke when he came back. How did you know he would even be back? Ino asked. He betrayed Konoha. He nearly killed you. Naruto smiled, standing up. I just knew. Ino suddenly remembered why she was there in the first place. Naruto, Kyuubi's taken over. You need to wake up. I've been trying, but I can't get out of here, he said with a deep frown. Kyuubi somehow trapped me in my memories. For the first time since Ino had known him, Naruto looked helpless. Well, you have to figure out something, she said. Kyuubi seriously hurt Sasuke and he's attacking Gaara. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He seemed to be deep in thought. Finally he spoke. I need you to go back and tell Gaara to do it. To do what? Ino asked. He'll know what I mean. It's the only way to wake me up, Naruto said. Go tell him. Ino looked around, eyes lingering on the boys still fighting below, surprised to see Naruto's form surrounded by red chakra that was beginning to take the shape of Kyuubi. I don't know how to get out of here, Naruto. I don't have the use of your hands. Naruto began to glow blue as he focused his chakra. Go, he said. And Ino felt herself being pulled from his body and slamming back into hers. She opened her eyes with a gasp and looked up at Kakashi, who had caught her when she fell limp. It didn't work, he asked her worriedly. She had only just performed the jutsu moments before and it looked as if Kyuubi hadn't let her into Naruto's mind. Her eyes immediately searched out Gaara's clone. He said to do it, she said to him, hoping that Naruto was correct and Gaara would understand what he meant. He what? Temari said, moving next to her. Kyuubi has him trapped in his memories, Ino told them as Kakashi helped her stand upright. He said it's the only way to wake him up. That is what he said. Gaara asked. Ino nodded. Gaara, Temari said, if you do it while Naruto's consciousness is trapped you could permanently switch them. It's what Naruto wants me to do. Temari, Gaara's clone said before it turned into a pile of sand, effectively ending the conversation. Temari sighed. What does Naruto want him to do? Kakashi asked. Gagufuin, she said. The 5-part seal, Kakashi said in astonishment. That's a forbidden technique. They both learned it, Kankuro said, coming to stand next to his sister, in case they needed to seal each other. But by doing it with Kyuubi in control they run the risk of simply sealing away Naruto's chakra and leaving Kyuubi in control. But if you can seal Kyuubi's chakra, why didn't they just perform the seal when Naruto had control? Ino asked. The 5-point seal also makes it difficult for Naruto to control his own chakra. Instead of the two chakras mixing, they start to become at odds with one another. Leaving it on for too long weakens him significantly, Temari explained. Kyuubi rushed at Gaara, using Naruto's hand to once again grab Gaara by his neck. Gaara made no attempt to even move away, simply allowing Kyuubi to hold him by the throat. Naruto's mouth broke into a fanged grin until Kyuubi realized his legs were bound tightly by sand. He lifted his free hand to slash at Gaara, but he snarled in frustration when he saw that too was restrained by sand. Gaara raised his right hand and performed a one-handed seal. 5 tiny blue flames of chakra appeared on each one of his fingertips. With his left hand he lifted Naruto's shirt, revealing the black curse seal on his stomach. Reeling his arm back, he slammed his fingers into Naruto's stomach. There was a howl of pain and suddenly the flare of red chakra that had surrounded Naruto's body died out. Gaara did not remove the sand restraints until blue eyes blinked at him, and the hand around his neck was quickly released. I'm sorry, Gaara, Naruto said softly as he took in the other man's ruffled appearance. Now we're even for our first fight, Gaara said with a shrug. Naruto looked around Sasuke's backyard, sadly watching as Sasuke's house continued to burn. His eyes then fell on the still Anbu Sakura was leaning over and he rushed over to him, ignoring the wave of dizziness caused by the seal. Is he alright? He asked Sakura fearfully. He'll be okay, she assured him. The gashes along his shoulder had been healed, but the angry red scars on Sasuke's pale skin showed Naruto exactly what had been done. No one spoke as he sat still for several moments. I'm sorry, he finally said, but they didn't know if he was speaking to them or to Sasuke. He then stood, not meeting anyone's eyes, and took off, leaving everyone staring after him as he disappeared into the night. When he awoke, the first thing he felt was a soft hand on his arm. His eyes were heavy, and it took him a long time to open them, only to have to squint to block out the bright light that had invaded his senses. When his eyes adjusted, he looked towards the hand on his arm, which he recognized as Sakura's. When she noticed he was awake, the pink-haired woman gave him a weak smile. "How are you doing?" she inquired. Sasuke took a look around the bland white room and realized he was in the hospital. "What happened?" he asked, settling into a sitting position. "Naruto has lost control of Kyuubi," said a voice from behind Sakura. Kakashi was leaning against the door's wall. "That much I know," Sasuke said, inspecting the wounds on his sore shoulder. They were now nothing more than pink scars. "Is Naruto all right?" he inquired. "Gaara was able to wake him up," Kakashi explained. "He checked on you and then ran away," Sakura explained. Sasuke gave her a quick glance. "Has he left?" "He hasn't been seen since last night," Kakashi explained. Sasuke threw the sheets from his lap and slid out of bed. "Sasuke," Sakura reprimanded, "you should get some rest." Sasuke completely ignored her. A monotone voice spoke from the doorway. "He's still in Konoha." Kakashi looked surprised next to him. He hadn't even noticed Gaara's approach. "Are you sure?" he inquired of the Sand Nin. "Yes, I can sense him. He is still present." "Where has he gone?" Sasuke said as he rose to his feet. Sakura objected. "Sasuke, you should really not." She came to a halt when Kakashi tossed a pair of pants and a shirt to Sasuke inside. "Everything you owned was destroyed in the fire," Kakashi explained. "You may borrow this for a short time." Sasuke nodded and put on one of Kakashi's typical Jounin uniforms, minus the vest. Sasuke returned his gaze to Gaara after he had finished dressing. "Where is he?" he inquired once more. Sasuke followed Gaara's gaze out the window, realizing exactly where Naruto had to be. It took some time for Sasuke to reach the summit of Mount Hokage. He'd never been on the monument in his 20-something years in the village. He wasn't sure if anyone was even permitted to be up here. He'd never heard of any rules prohibiting it, but this was a memorial and a place of respect. Sasuke was unsurprised to find Naruto sitting comfortably between several rocky spikes in the fourth's hair. Sasuke carefully made his way along the fourth's head until he finally stood next to him. And if Naruto sensed his presence, he didn't turn. Naruto drew his knees up to his chest and wrapped his arms around his legs. As he gazed out over Konoha, his chin rested on his knees. The sun had risen several hours before, and the village center was gradually filling with people as shops began to open. Sasuke sat down next to Naruto. He appeared tired, but his eyes remained their usual bright blue. "Are you all right?" Naruto continued to gaze out over Konoha. "I'm fine," Sasuke replied. They sat in silence for a while, taking in the scenery, until Naruto spoke again, this time looking at Sasuke. "I'm sorry I burned down your house," he said, visibly upset. Sasuke shook his head. "It was nothing more than a house." "You grew up there?" Naruto asked, surprised. "On my own," Sasuke stated. "It's the location where Itachi murdered my parents. There aren't many pleasant memories to be found there." The wind began to pick up, ruffling Sasuke's hair. Sasuke found himself staring at the third's large face. He appeared much younger than Sasuke remembered him in the monument, having had his face carved in the rock long before the deep wrinkles began to appear on his face. Around the third, Sasuke couldn't see the second and first's faces clearly. Turning to the other side, Sasuke looked at the fifth, the current Hokage, Tsunade. "Tsunade said she chose you to be the sixth at your funeral," Sasuke explained. Naruto shook his head. "Once upon a time, they say. Are you going to do it now that no one thinks you're dead?" Naruto laughed. "I can't protect Konoha in this way," he admitted. "People must defend Konoha from me." Sasuke smirked. "Did you give up on your dreams so easily? Dreams die hard, and you hold them in your hand long after they crumble," Naruto said quietly. "Becoming Hokage is a dream that is now out of reach for me. When did you turn into such a pessimist?" Naruto burst out laughing. "I'm a realist, not a pessimist. You witnessed what happened last night. I tried to kill you and destroyed your house." Naruto abruptly cut himself off. Frustrated, Kyuubi's power was growing rapidly. He could almost hear the fox in his head now, and his desire to kill was stronger than ever. When he was awake, Kyuubi took over his body. He was gaining too much control, which had never happened before. Naruto realized that the seal had been gradually deteriorating over time. The soothing presence that had kept Kyuubi somewhat apart from him was fading, and it would soon be gone entirely. For the time being, the 5-part seal was keeping the fox's chakra at bay. He could feel both chakras within him being separated, but they were becoming unstable due to their inability to mix. He would soon require Gaara's assistance in breaking the seal. After that, Kyuubi would have free reign once more. And Naruto was certain the fox was planning to break the seal for good this time. He'd spent the last several hours weighing his options. But only one seemed obvious. Naruto began tentatively. "Sasuke, I'm down. What are you losing?" Looking at him, Sasuke inquired. "Kyuubi will take over soon." Naruto predicted. "You'll fight him off again?" Sasuke said, his brow furrowed. "No." Naruto replied, "He's going to completely take over." He needed Sasuke to comprehend. Naruto couldn't fight the fox after the seal was broken. Sasuke was staring at him, apparently trying to figure out if Naruto was serious. Naruto sighed and reached up to loosen his hideite, pulling it off and slipping it into his pocket. Sasuke's stomach sank. Naruto's hair had turned a deeper red since the last time he saw it. Naruto now appeared to be a redhead with blonde highlights rather than the other way around. Naruto's voice echoed in his head. "The more we connect, the redder it gets. The seal is weakening," Naruto said as he stood up. He lifted his shirt, using a bit of chakra to reveal the seal on his stomach. When they were younger, Sasuke had only seen the seal a few times. It was the same. A spiral around Naruto's navel with several flame-like markings around it, but instead of the solid black it used to be, it was now a faded light gray. Sasuke also stood up. "Sasuke," Naruto said solemnly, "someone must intervene before Kyuubi takes over." Sasuke shook his head, knowing what Naruto was trying to say. "We should go speak with Tsunade. I'm confident she'll be able to reinforce the seal. Since I left, she's been looking for ways to do so. There's nothing else we can do." Naruto paused before continuing. "My demise is his demise." There was a long silence as Sasuke pondered what to say. How to demonstrate to Naruto that death was not the only option. Naruto's voice cut him off in his tracks. "I'd like it to be you." "Don't be stupid, Naruto," Sasuke yelled. "We'll figure something else out." "I've been trying to figure out something for the last 10 years, Sasuke. There is nothing to decipher. He's going to take command. I will not allow him to use my body to kill everyone who is important to me. So I have to kill the one person who is important to me instead." Sasuke spoke up, his voice rising. "No, I'm not going to do it, Sasuke," Naruto said quietly, his gaze fixed on Konoha. "I'm not going to ask anyone else. You don't want anyone else to deal with it?" Sasuke yelled. "You'll save them from the agony. There's no need to stain anyone else's hands. Just leave it to Sasuke." Naruto raised his head. "No, I don't want it to be anyone other than you. You're my best friend and the only person I can rely on." Sasuke clenched his teeth and swallowed the lump in his throat. "Only you can do it," Naruto said, his gaze fixed on Sasuke's left hand. Sasuke recognized the significance right away. "I've used Chidori on you 3 times and you haven't died," he argued, his voice cracking. Naruto grinned. "You never tried to break my heart." Sasuke averted his gaze, refusing to meet Naruto's gaze. "Do not ask me to do this." Naruto did not respond, and the two men stood silent for a moment. "Let's go back to the village," Naruto said at the end. Naruto took hold of Sasuke's arm and began to lead them away from the fourth's head. Naruto subconsciously placed his free hand on his stomach, clutching the fabric of his shirt directly above the seal. Kyuubi would be unable to take over while the 5-part seal was still in place, but it had to be done quickly. Shikamaru only needed to see the firm set of her lips and the fiery glare in Ino's eyes as she advanced on him to know that he was in trouble yet again. Ino had treated him well since the previous night, when he had nearly died in the forest. Actually, the young lady was more than nice. She was almost sweet, however. Judging by her expression, the terrifying blonde was back to her normal self. He looked around for a way out, but he had been standing right in front of Chaoji and the former teammate. They were meeting on the outskirts of town before going to lunch. Kiba had told them about the rumor that Sasuke's house had caught fire last night, and Hinata had been saying quietly that they should go visit him and offer to help him if he needed it. When Chaoji and Shikamaru sensed the intense aura that had caused them to flee for years, Chaoji took a step towards Kiba, Hinata, and Shino, giving Shikamaru plenty of room to dodge any blows thrown his way. Relieved that the look was directed at his best friend. "Didn't you know, Shikamaru?" When Ino arrived at him, she completely ignored the other 4 ninjas. He refrained from rolling his eyes. Why was he constantly chastised for knowing things? "What?" Shikamaru inquired. She hissed, "Kyuubi." Shikamaru's pupils dilated. Chaoji and teammate exchanged curious glances. "How long have you known Kyuubi had been sealed in Naruto?" Ino stated. "What?" Kiba exclaimed, his gaze fixed on her. They'd all heard about the 4th defeating the 9-tailed fox demon Kyuubi. "How come we weren't told?" Ino stated. Shikamaru was enraged. Ino was obviously upset, but she couldn't go around telling everyone. "You weren't told because it's none of your business," he abruptly stated, surprising everyone. "The 4th imbued him with Kyuubi from the moment he was born. No one from our generation was permitted to know because the third anticipated that we would despise him in the same way that the older generation did, in the same way that our parents did. Is that why everyone was such jerks to him? Kiba snarled. Akamaru was irritated by his master's rage. It explains why so few people came to his funeral. Shino reflected. Poor Naruto-kun. Hinata lamented. It wasn't his fault. He's our friend, Chaoji said, nodding his head. We could have defended him if we had known why the villagers treated him the way they did. Shikamaru blinked at each of them. He wasn't sure how his friends would react, and part of him assumed they wouldn't think about the Naruto they knew as a person and just look at him like everyone else. He was relieved to be wrong for once. When Hinata stepped forward, he was jolted out of his reverie. Naruto-kun, she exclaimed, waving. Of course, her voice was still very soft. The rest of the group looked up to see two men walking side by side toward Mount Hokage. When he heard her call his name and saw the group, the shorter of the two smiled timidly. He extended his hand to greet. They were all staring at him strangely. And Naruto noticed his smile fading. His gaze was drawn to Ino, who was staring at him, and he suddenly realized why. Ino must have informed them. Sasuke noticed Naruto's body tensing and found himself staring at everyone. Why? Ino inquired, peering between them. What are you doing with him? How can you put your faith in him? He nearly killed you. It wasn't his fault, Sasuke growled, noticing Naruto's wide blue eyes. Everyone was taken aback when Ino whirled on him. That's not what I'm talking about, she exclaimed, her eyes ablaze, as he backed away from the enraged woman. It was Sasuke's turn to be wide-eyed. You pierced his chest with a Chidori in the Valley of the End. You wanted to murder him. Everyone's attention was now focused on Sasuke, who had lost what little color remained on his pale skin and was now ghostly white. Ino, stop, Naruto said calmly. How can you stand there pretending it never happened? She questioned. You admitted to me that was your worst memory. Naruto noticed the troubled expression on Sasuke's face. Ino, Naruto replied. I wasn't referring to what Sasuke did when I said it was my worst memory. Ino and Sasuke both looked at him, surprised. It's the worst because I failed on that particular day. By failing, I allowed my best friend to face what could have been his death. I couldn't shield him. Everyone was staring at him now. Naruto had matured, they realized. Besides, Naruto said, shrugging, losing to this jerk is humiliating. The tension that had settled over the small group dissipated as Sasuke snorted. Naruto, Kiba said solemnly, stepping in front of the whiskered man. Naruto and Sasuke both tensed, anticipating the inevitable question, why did you leave? When Kiba asked his actual question, he looked at the scruffy man in confusion. What the hell happened to your hair? He'd completely forgotten he wasn't dressed in his Hidaite. Kiba smiled. I know you're friends with Gaara, but I wouldn't take his fashion advice. Red is not your favorite color, he said this while wrapping his arm around Naruto's shoulder and dragging the poor befuddled man towards town. Come on, we were just on our way to lunch. When he heard Naruto ask, ramen, with that same hopeful tone he had always used as a child, Sasuke almost smiled. Shino and Hinata followed their former teammate, and Team 10 was right behind them. Kiba called back, you coming, Uchiha? After Naruto looked over his shoulder and smiled at Sasuke as he followed them. Sasuke shrugged and turned away, his smile hidden. Tsunade thanked Kakashi before dismissing him. Having been briefed on what had occurred the night before at the Uchiha residence, Tsunade turned to Jiraiya, who was leaning against her wall after the silver-haired Jounin had left. His thick arms were crossed. His head was bowed, and his chin rested on his chest. His relaxed posture and closed eyes gave the impression that he was sleeping, but Tsunade knew better. Jiraiya sighed and looked up. Tsunade explained, this is the second time in less than a week. Jiraiya turned away from her. He's losing his cool. Tsunade rubbed the bridge of her nose tiredly, suddenly grateful for the jutsu that kept her looking young. Without it, the stress of her job would have made her appear even older than she was. Oh my god, I need a drink, she exclaimed. I've gone through all of the books and scrolls I have. I can't figure out how to make the seal stronger. Jiraiya remained silent. I'm the Hokage, Tsunade explained further. I need to think about Konoha's safety. If he can't maintain control any longer. She trailed off, her face buried in her palms. Everyone is in jeopardy. Behind her hands, her voice was muffled. Everyone, not just Konoha. Allowing him to leave Konoha would be the same as allowing Kyuubi to infect other villages. Jiraiya finally said something. Are you really thinking what I think you're thinking? Tsunade didn't look up, but the tensing of her shoulders was all Jiraiya needed to know. I don't know what else to do, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. Jiraiya, please give me another option. Please. But Jiraiya was at a loss for words. Tsunade's solution appeared to be the only one. As much as admitting it made him sick, Tsunade finally looked him in the eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks, and Jiraiya noticed that, despite her jutsu, she appeared old and tired. "I'll send an Anbu team," she said. "No," Jiraiya said as he pushed himself away from the wall and made his way to the center of the room. "I'll take care of it. He was my student, and I will not have him murdered by an Anbu team as if he were some missing nin." Tsunade gave a weak nod and looked out the window. "Then I'll leave it to you," she said quietly. Jiraiya left the office without saying anything else. Tsunade was sitting at her desk, clutching the necklace around her neck. Naruto had given it to her before leaving. "You should keep this, Tsunade Baba. You'll look after it better than I would." Her grip tightened as she locked her gaze on Mount Hokage. Sakura smiled across the table at Lee, who was telling her a story about a recent mission with Guy, complete with flailing arms and wide-eyed expressions. Years ago, Lee's excitable personality embarrassed her, especially in small public spaces like the restaurant where they were now eating. Lee, on the other hand, had grown on her to the point where she found his behavior endearing. He had the innocence of a small child, and his big happy grins were contagious. Apart from that, everyone in the village understood Guy's unrestrained exuberance, and few people in the village thought twice when either green-clad man went off on a tangent about the beauty of youth and self-respect. Sakura laughed as a waitress ducked beneath one of Lee's grander arm motions and proceeded to the table next to them as if nothing had happened. Lee became even more excited, and Sakura wondered why she was surprised that this could happen. "Shikamaru!" exclaimed the dark-haired Jounin, waving frantically. "Kiba!" Sakura turned to see not only Shikamaru and Kiba standing by the door, but also both of their former Genin teams. She gave a sad smile. It was great that they could still do things together. Team 7 hadn't done anything as a group since they were 12. Thanks to Naruto's death and Sasuke's desire to sulk alone in the Uchiha compound, the teams approached them, and Lee asked a passing waiter if they could group some tables together. When Sakura noticed that teams 10 and 8 were not alone, she took a drink and nearly spit it out. Naruto stood there, looking strange with his red hair, smiling as he looked around the restaurant, and Sasuke stood next to him, hands shoved in pockets and staring ahead with his usual scowl. "Naruto!" she exclaimed, standing up and hugging the surprised man. Sasuke had tracked him down. She was relieved. "Hello, Sasuke," she said, knowing better than to try to hug him and instead placing her hand on his arm and gently squeezing it. He gave her a nod. Team 7 was complete once more. Naruto discovered that he was having a good time. He had anticipated an awkward reunion filled with a barrage of questions he didn't want to answer. Instead, they ate, laughed, and chatted about everything and nothing. His friends drew him back into the group as if nothing had happened in the previous 10 years. Sasuke didn't participate in much of the happy banter, but seeing Naruto's bright smile as he caught up with everyone made him happy. Of course, the conversation they had on Mount Hokage lingered in his mind, but it was difficult to be concerned when Naruto was having so much fun. Naruto became aware that he was being watched. He looked around the restaurant, ignoring the odd stares or, on rare occasions, glares directed his way. His gaze was finally met by a pair of warm brown eyes. A man stood near the door, his thick brown hair pulled back into a ponytail and his clothes covered by a green Chunin vest. He was biting his bottom lip as he watched Naruto intently. As Naruto stood, the din at the table died away, and everyone looked at him in confusion. He walked over to the Chunin by the door and stood in front of him, ignoring them. "Iruka-sensei," Naruto said, at a loss for words. Iruka did not respond right away, and Naruto nervously fiddled with the hem of his shirt. The pony-tailed man suddenly grabbed Naruto and pulled him into a tight hug. "I heard some villagers mention seeing you here," and Iruka paused and took a shaky breath. "Tsunade-sama said you were dead years ago, but I couldn't help myself. I had to come see for myself." Naruto returned Iruka's hug. He had missed Iruka so much when he first left that his heart ached every time he remembered the gentle Chunin. Naruto's only connection to family was him, and he knew that if anyone in Konoha would be affected by his apparent death, it would be him, and hurting him like that had hurt Naruto. "How are you doing?" Naruto inquired as to when Iruka let him go. Iruka made a noise that sounded like a cross between a laugh and a sob. "All right," he said quietly. Sasuke and the others stood back and watched the reunion of teacher and student. Naruto and Iruka exchanged a few words before the former blonde returned to the table. "I'm going to Iruka House Sensei's for a little while," he explained, though this was more for Sasuke. "I'm glad I got to see you all again." Once, Sasuke noticed Naruto's hesitation in his sentence and glared at him, knowing what he was about to say. More, everyone said their goodbyes, resisting the urge to invite him back to explain himself. Naruto left a few moments later, And they sat quietly for a few moments until a familiar voice interrupted their thoughts with a yo. Kakashi stood behind Sasuke, and he appeared so unexpectedly that they wondered if he had just teleported in. "Sasuke," said the silver-haired Jounin, "the Hokage wishes to meet with you." Sasuke nodded and stood, leaving the restaurant without saying goodbye. When Kiba was sure the Uchiha was out of hearing range, he called back, adding, "You jerk." It was getting dark when he left Uruka's. Naruto had spent hours reminiscing and catching up with the older man. When Uruka asked why he left, Naruto explained that he couldn't feel right if the Chunin didn't know the truth. He decided to go for a walk around Konoha because he was at a loss for what to do next. He needed to speak with Sasuke once more, if for no other reason than to say farewell. If Sasuke couldn't kill him, he'd kill himself. He didn't have much time left to argue about it, but he needed to see Sasuke again. Naruto found himself on the outskirts of the training grounds, about to leave when he sensed a familiar presence. With ease and a smile, Naruto dodged the shuriken that had flown from behind him. "This brought back memories for me." He turned, catching the kunai on its way to his face. "You can do better than that, pervert," he said, flipping the kunai in his hand for a better grip and raising it to defend himself as Jiraiya slashed at him with another kunai from the branches of one of the surrounding trees. Metal ran into metal. This was how they sparred for the 3 years he had trained with Jiraiya. The Sannin let him do most of the training on his own, but he would attack Naruto at random when the boy appeared to be caught off guard. Naruto was rarely taken by surprise after years of this. Naruto dodged a punch and kicked his legs out, attempting to sweep Jiraiya's legs out from under him. Sannin jumped into the air to avoid being hit. "You lost control again," Jiraiya said, landing back on the ground and not even pausing before launching another kunai at Naruto, who sidestepped calmly. "There's not much control left to lose," Naruto admitted truthfully. They stood across from each other for a few long moments, neither saying anything. Jiraiya appeared to be avoiding his gaze. Naruto finally spoke up. "Isn't this going to be just another spar?" It was a statement rather than a question. Jiraiya shook his head slowly. "It was either me or a bunch of Anbu," he said to his former student, raising his eyes to meet the blue-eyed gaze steadily. "I'm glad you're here," Naruto said, "but you'll have to do better than you did before." He assumed a ready stance. "I'll let only one person kill me without a fight, and it's not you." Jiraiya observed the younger man quietly. He had believed he could do it, but now that he was here, standing across from his former student, his resolve had wavered. Naruto noticed the hesitation. "Don't let emotions get in the way of this, Orochimaru. This is only a mission." Jiraiya inhaled deeply and nodded. "Okay, young man, are you prepared?" "Always." As Jiraiya attacked, Naruto realized he was at a significant disadvantage. His chakra control was shaky at best with the 5-part seal in place. Fortunately, Jiraiya appeared to be practicing his taijutsu for the time being. Naruto had the advantage in terms of speed. He easily avoided the kicks and punches thrown at him. Jiraiya leapt away, putting some distance between them. Realizing he couldn't do anything close range, he took out 6 kunai and held them between his fingers. Naruto needed to be slowed down. He began to feel nauseous if he could only hit 1 or 2 of these. Naruto's words returned to him. "This is merely a mission." Naruto grasped the situation. He didn't hold it against him. He infused chakra into the kunai before spinning them and launching them at Naruto at speeds he couldn't completely avoid. He was taken aback when the red-haired man made no move to avoid the kunai, instead standing impassively with his arms crossed. Eerily similar to another red-haired demon vessel Jiraiya knew, the kunai struck, but instead of slicing into Naruto, they bounced harmlessly off his skin. Naruto quickly dispelled the threat by releasing the chakra shield. It had taken a lot of concentration to do something that had become second nature over the years. His chakra was more volatile now that he had tapped into it, and he wasn't sure how much more he could use. Jiraiya didn't let Naruto's blocking of the kunai distract him for long. Instead attempting a jutsu, he needed to slow Naruto down or he would never be able to complete his mission. "Katen, Gaokakyu no Jutsu," he exclaimed as his fingers flew into familiar seals. Jiraiya wrapped his hand around his mouth, controlling the flames he was spitting out in the form of a large fireball. Naruto almost didn't get away. He hadn't had to use fire evasion techniques since he was almost 18. But then he remembered that Kyuubi's chakra had been sealed, and it would no longer be able to absorb flames as it normally did. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he exclaimed, and 10 clones appeared before him, taking the hit instead. Naruto was on the verge of collapsing. His chakra seemed to be bouncing around inside his body. He was dizzy from the sensation, and he couldn't get enough control over his chakra to use it again. Jiraiya didn't take long after the fire attack to start throwing kunai, knowing they wouldn't hit but hoping to distract Naruto long enough for him to use another jutsu. When the kunai didn't bounce harmlessly off his student, he came to a halt. One sank into his right thigh, another into his shoulder, and the third slammed into his stomach. Naruto grunted, stumbling backwards as a result of the blow. His back collided with a tree, and he found himself leaning against the trunk, unable to support himself. Naruto slid down the tree and sat quietly at the base. Jiraiya would have assumed he was just relaxing under a tree if he couldn't see the 3 kunai sticking out of him because his left leg was bent. Allowing him to rest his arm on the knee, Jiraiya moved closer, feeling as if someone had grabbed his heart and squeezed it. He stood a few feet away from Naruto, a painful expression of regret on his features. "Ero Sennin, can you do it in one hit?" Naruto inquired, his blue eyes peering up through his red bangs. "Yeah, kid," Jiraiya replied quietly. He threw up a kunai. "I apologize, Naruto. Believe me, you're doing me a favor," Naruto said, closing his eyes and leaning against the trunk behind him. Jiraiya threw the kunai, aiming for the young man's heart, while swallowing the lump in his throat. Naruto heard the kunai slip from his sensei's grasp and braced himself for the blow that never came. He raised his head and opened his eyes, blinking at the back of his navy blue-clad legs. The kunai meant for his heart was tightly clenched in a shaking fist. Jiraiya remained standing, calmly meeting Sasuke's piercing gaze. The Sharingan had turned Sasuke's eyes red, and the 3 dots that surrounded his pupils were dangerously spinning. "What are you doing?" he inquired of Jiraiya, his voice growling. "I'm on a mission," Jiraiya explained, not letting the relief he felt when Sasuke caught the kunai show through his calm exterior. "Attainment," Sasuke hissed in response. He was filled with rage. Sasuke prepared to launch himself at Jiraiya, wishing he had his katana to slice the Sannin in half. He didn't mind being one of the legendary 3. He was going to murder him. "Stop, Sasuke." Naruto's voice was soft, and his words were more like a choked groan. Recognizing the pain in Naruto's voice, Sasuke quickly turned, completely forgetting Jiraiya. Naruto had pushed himself to his feet and was leaning heavily on the tree for support. He had removed the kunai from his body, and now blood was flowing down his arm from the shoulder wound, small streams of red culminating at his fingertips and dripping onto the grass like rain. The stomach wound had left a growing dark stain on Naruto's navy blue shirt, and although his black pants obscured the extent of the leg wound, Sasuke could see blood trailing down Naruto's ankle. Sasuke approached him quickly, wrapping Naruto's good arm around his shoulder and a gentle arm around his waist. "How long will Kyuubi take to heal you?" he wondered, wondering if he should find a medic nin. "Kyuubi's chakra is currently sealed," Naruto explained. "He is unable to heal me." "What?" Sasuke inquired. He'd been unconscious when Gaara woke him up, but no one had told him about the sealing. Jiraiya explained. Gaara put a 5-point seal on him. Sasuke gave a thoughtful nod. "Doesn't that solve the problem?" he wondered, looking at Naruto, who shook his head. "The seal also messes with my chakra," he explained. "I've only used it twice tonight, and it's all over my body. When the 2 chakras are unable to combine, they become unstable. The seal is only for a limited time." Sasuke groaned. Naruto suddenly leaned in closer, and Sasuke realized he was having more difficulty supporting himself. "I need to get you to a medical nin," said Sasuke. He looked at Jiraiya as if daring him to stop him. "Sasuke," Naruto explained, "perhaps you should just let." Sasuke reached down and scooped him into his arms before he could finish his sentence. Naruto began walking towards the village, taking care not to jar his wounds. Naruto exhaled a sigh. Sasuke made his decision fairly quickly. Normally, he would have taken Naruto straight to the Hokage, but her obvious involvement in Jiraiya's actions disqualified her right away. He'd known something wasn't right the moment he walked into her office. She appeared tired and sad, qualities he had never seen in her in all his years of knowing her. "Sasuke," she'd said, fist clutching her necklace, "in light of what happened last night, I've arranged for you to stay at the inn." "Hokage-sama, there's no need. I can stay at one of the other Uchiha homes." He did, after all, live in a deserted community. There are many empty houses. "Naruto can stay with me as well," he said, demonstrating that he didn't blame him. He was taken aback by her sudden tensing of her shoulders. He gave her a suspicious look. "Ah, yes," she replied. "I'm sure he'll enjoy it." The tone of her voice raised red flags in his mind. He'd gone to find Naruto after she'd dismissed him. It had taken him a long time to figure out where Iruka lived, and when he did, the Chunin informed him that Naruto had left. Sasuke's stomach tightened as he realized that if he'd been a second later, he kicked rather than knocked on the door he had arrived at because his hands were full. He adjusted Naruto's weight before kicking again because there was no response. Naruto's silence would have terrified him if he hadn't been able to feel the other man's soft breaths on his neck. He briefly considered falling asleep, but a glimpse of blue irises told him otherwise. Hi, I'm coming, came a voice from inside. The door opened and Sakura stared at them in shock. What did you do to him? She hissed at Sasuke, taking in the blood running down Naruto's shoulder. Sasuke almost dropped Naruto in surprise at the vehemence in her voice. She had never spoken to him like that. Sakura-chan, Naruto said quietly. Sasuke didn't do it. Sakura heaved a sigh and stepped aside, ushering Sasuke into her house. Put him on the couch, she said before disappearing into another room. Sakura's house was neat, but Sasuke hadn't expected anything different from the pink-haired woman. He walked past the foyer and into her living room, surprised at the soft yellows and peach colors that decorated the room. For some reason he had imagined everything in Sakura's house would be pink. Sasuke gently laid Naruto onto the couch, sitting on the floor next to him. Naruto had closed his eyes, but his uneven breaths told him that he was not sleeping. Sakura reappeared, medical supplies in her arms. Dumping the supplies by the floor near the couch, she shooed Sasuke out of the way and set to work. She used a pair of scissors to cut Naruto's shirt off, giving her access to 2 of the injuries. Who did this? Sakura asked, gently wiping the blood away from the stomach wound. Jiraiya, Sasuke said when Naruto offered no answer. What? Why? Sakura said, looking between them. Naruto finally spoke. Because it's something that needs to be done. No, it isn't, Sasuke said angrily. Yes, it is, Sasuke, Naruto snapped. Jiraiya and Tsunade recognize it. Use your eyes for something other than the Sharingan. Forget it, Sakura said, interrupting what looked like the start of a rather heated argument. I'm sorry I asked. She placed her hands over the now clean stomach wound, and Naruto shivered at the cool feel of her palm on his heated skin. Then the point of contact began to warm as she used her chakra to heal him. Sasuke and Naruto remained silent as she did the same for the other 2 wounds. Thankfully, the pants cube I had put on the night before were loose enough that the leg could be rolled up, saving both Naruto and Sakura any embarrassment. As Sakura was finishing the leg wound, there was a pop and a puff of smoke, and she backed away with a startled scream as a large frog appeared on Naruto's chest. Naruto blinked at the orange face that appeared in his vision. Gamakichi looked around, stopping in surprise when his gaze fell on Sasuke. I thought you left Konoha, kid, he said to Naruto. Long story, Naruto said with a sigh. He sat up and the frog remained exactly where he was, using chakra to stick to Naruto and giving the impression that Naruto had a strange orange growth on his chest. Well, this actually works out well for you, Gamakichi said. Akatsuki is on the move. They are heading for Konoha as we speak. What? Sakura said in shock. How far is Akatsuki? Naruto asked. They should be here by daybreak, Gamakichi informed him. We need to inform Tsunade-sama, Sakura said, gathering her medical supplies and standing. Naruto nodded, standing as well. You're actually going to go to her, Sasuke said, staring hard at Naruto. Naruto rolled his eyes. Relax, she's not going to reach out and strangle me to death with you there watching her like a hawk. Naruto, she ordered you killed, Sasuke said. Sakura's jaw dropped. Not only had Jiraiya been the one to do it, Tsunade had ordered it. Sasuke, I'm not getting into this argument with you again. You and I both know why she did it, and as much as you don't want to admit it, you know that she's only looking out for the good of the village. As am I. Naruto paused before meeting his dark eyes sadly. If you truly meant what you said about protecting Konoha for me, then you would see why it has to be this way. Sasuke looked away. Sakura stood quietly to the side, recognizing that this conversation had nothing to do with her. Even Gamakichi, although he remained attached to Naruto's chest, stayed quiet. Sasuke finally looked up. Let's go warn Tsunade about Akatsuki.
I will continue the story in next part, so turn on the bell notification so you never miss an upload. Till then, we weeb offline.